Captain Marcus Wellington had seen his share of impossible situations during 15 years in the Air Force, but nothing had prepared him for the emergency briefing at Peterson Space Force Base on that humid Tuesday morning in July. The classified alert had come through at 0400 hours, jolting him from restless sleep in his base quarters. As he entered the secure briefing room, the tension was palpable among the assembled pilots and ground crew. Colonel Jennifer Hayes stood at the front of the room, her usually composed demeanor cracked with barely contained urgency. Behind her, satellite imagery displayed on multiple screens showed what appeared to be mass evacuations across major metropolitan areas on the East Coast. Marcus had never seen his commanding officer look so shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level," Colonel Hayes began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "At approximately 2,300 hours yesterday, we lost contact with multiple civilian and military installations from Atlanta to Boston. Initial reconnaissance flights have confirmed our worst fears." She clicked to the next slide, revealing aerial photographs that made Marcus's blood run cold. Cities that should have been bustling with morning traffic were eerily empty, except for massive crowds of people moving in unnatural, coordinated patterns through the streets. Even from thousands of feet above, something was clearly wrong with the way these crowds moved. The CDC has confirmed an outbreak of what they're calling a neurological pathogen that appears to be spreading rapidly through direct contact, the colonel continued. Infected individuals become extremely aggressive and seem to lose all higher cognitive functions. They attack uninfected persons on sight. Lieutenant Rebecca Torres, one of Marcus's most trusted squadron members, raised her hand. "Ma'am, are we talking about some kind of biological weapon attack?" "We don't know the source yet, Lieutenant. What we do know is that civilian authorities are completely overwhelmed. Local law enforcement and National Guard units have either been overrun or are barely maintaining perimeters around safe zones. The President has authorized military intervention under martial law provisions." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had family in Philadelphia, his younger sister Emma worked as a nurse at Jefferson Hospital, and his parents lived in a retirement community just outside the city. The last text he'd received from Emma was 2 days ago, a cheerful message about her upcoming engagement. "Sir, what's our mission?" asked Captain David Chen, the squadron's weapons systems officer. Colonel Hayes clicked to a tactical map showing predetermined flight paths and target zones. "Operation Last Stand commences in 6 hours. We're coordinating with remaining ground forces to establish and maintain secure evacuation corridors. Our primary objectives are reconnaissance, close air support for evacuation operations, and if necessary, containment strikes on infected population centers." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus had flown combat missions in 3 different theaters, but the idea of potentially firing on American cities, even to contain this outbreak, was something none of them had ever imagined. "I know what you're all thinking," the colonel continued. "This goes against everything we've trained for. But the situation reports from affected areas are unlike anything in modern history. Entire city blocks have been overrun within hours. Hospital systems have collapsed. Emergency services are non-functional. We are quite literally the last line of organized defense for millions of American citizens." She paused, allowing the weight of responsibility to settle on the room. "I won't lie to you. Some of you may know people in the affected areas. Some of you may have to make impossible decisions in the coming days. But remember this, every person we help evacuate, every safe corridor we maintain, every hour we buy for the scientific community to find a solution, could mean the difference between the survival and extinction of our civilization." Marcus raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's the current status of communication with civilian authorities in the affected zones?" "Sporadic at best, Captain. Most cell towers are down, either from infrastructure damage or power grid failures. We're relying primarily on military communication networks and emergency broadcast systems. Many local government officials have either evacuated or are presumed casualties." The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering tactical details, rules of engagement, and contingency plans. As the assembled personnel filed out to begin pre-flight preparations, Marcus caught Colonel Hayes's attention. "Colonel, I have family in the Philadelphia area. My sister works at Jefferson Hospital." She nodded grimly. "Philadelphia is currently under a tentative quarantine perimeter, but it's not holding well." "I'm sorry, Marcus. I wish I had better news." As Marcus walked toward the flight line where his F-16 was being prepped for what might be the most important mission of his career, he couldn't shake the image of those aerial photographs. The crowds moving through empty streets with that unnatural coordination. The abandoned cars scattered across highways. The smoke rising from multiple points across every affected city. Within hours, he would be flying over American soil, potentially engaging American citizens who had become something else entirely. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any combat mission he'd ever flown. The pre-flight check on Marcus's F-16 Fighting Falcon took on an almost ritualistic quality as he went through each system with meticulous care. His crew chief, Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, had been with the squadron for 8 years and had never seen the base in such a state of controlled chaos. Ground crews were working around the clock to arm and fuel aircraft while intelligence personnel continuously updated mission parameters based on rapidly changing conditions on the ground. "Sir, we've loaded you with a mixed payload," Rodriguez reported, consulting his checklist. "Standard air-to-ground ordnance, but also some experimental crowd dispersal systems that just came in from Eglin. The brass thinks they might be more effective than conventional weapons for this type of situation." Marcus nodded, though the thought of using any kind of weapon against civilians, even infected ones, made his stomach churn. "What's the word from the other bases?" "Shaw, Seymour Johnson, and Langley are all spinning up similar operations. Sounds like they're coordinating with Marine units at Quantico and some Navy assets from Norfolk." "This is big, Captain. Really big." As Marcus completed his exterior inspection, Lieutenant Torres approached with her flight gear. Despite her typical confident demeanor, he could see the tension in her shoulders. Rebecca had always been one of his most reliable wingmen, cool under pressure and precise in execution. "Marcus, I just got off the phone with my brother in Richmond," she said quietly. "He's a paramedic there. The stories he's telling me." She trailed off, shaking her head. "People are barricading themselves in their homes. The hospitals are completely overrun. He said they've stopped responding to calls in certain parts of the city because entire neighborhoods have gone dark." "What does he mean by gone dark?" "No lights, no radio traffic, no signs of normal human activity. But movement. Lots of movement. Groups of people wandering the streets at all hours, but not like refugees or evacuees. He said they move like they're hunting something." Marcus felt a chill despite the oppressive summer heat. The official briefings had been clinical and tactical, but Rebecca's second-hand account painted a picture that was far more terrifying than anything in the classified reports. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "My brother said the emergency radio networks are picking up transmissions from some kind of underground resistance groups. Civilians who've organized into survival communities in subway tunnels, shopping centers, anywhere they can fortify and defend." "Are they asking for military assistance?" "That's the thing, some are, but others are actively warning military units to stay away. They claim that conventional military tactics don't work against these infected people. That they need to be dealt with in ways that..." She paused, clearly struggling with the implications. "In ways that our rules of engagement don't allow for." Before Marcus could respond, the base's emergency communication system crackled to life. "All flight personnel report to stations immediately. Operation Last Stand is moving to immediate deployment. Repeat, all flight personnel to stations." The next hour passed in a blur of final systems checks, weather briefings, and tactical updates. The squadron would be flying in formation toward the Washington-Baltimore corridor, where intelligence suggested a pocket of several thousand civilians were holding out in the tunnels beneath Union Station. Their mission was to provide air cover while Marine ground units attempted to establish an evacuation route to a secure area outside the city. As Marcus strapped into his cockpit, he caught sight of a news report playing on one of the ground crew's portable devices. A reporter embedded with National Guard units was describing scenes that sounded like something from a disaster movie: abandoned military vehicles, overrun checkpoints, and coordinated attacks by groups of infected individuals who seemed to possess an unnatural ability to work together despite their apparent loss of individual consciousness. "All stations, this is Tower Control," came the voice through his headset. "Weather is clear, winds favorable. You are cleared for immediate departure. Good hunting, and Godspeed." Marcus's engines roared to life as he taxied toward the runway. Behind him, 11 other F-16s prepared to follow in formation. In the distance, he could see larger transport aircraft taking off, C-130s loaded with medical supplies, communication equipment, and rapid deployment teams headed for staging areas near the quarantine zones. As his aircraft lifted off from Peterson, Marcus caught a glimpse of the Colorado landscape below. The familiar mountains and plains looked exactly as they always had, but somehow everything felt different now. The radio chatter between aircraft was more subdued than usual, lacking the typical banter and jokes that usually characterized routine flights. "Flight leader, this is Torres," came Rebecca's voice through the comm system. "I'm picking up some unusual radio traffic on the emergency frequencies. Sounds like there are still active police units in the DC area, but they're reporting some pretty strange tactical situations." "Define strange, Torres." "They're saying the infected individuals are exhibiting coordinated behavior that suggests some kind of collective intelligence. Groups of them are setting up what appear to be ambushes, using basic tools, even communicating through some kind of vocalization system." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The official briefings had described the infected as mindless, driven only by aggressive instincts. If they were actually capable of tactical thinking and coordination, this mission was about to become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The flight toward the eastern seaboard took Marcus and his squadron over landscapes that told the story of a nation in chaos. Even from 30,000 feet, the signs were unmistakable. Interstate highways that should have been flowing with traffic instead showed long lines of abandoned vehicles. Entire sections of cities were dark, with only scattered fires providing points of light in areas that should have been bustling with normal urban activity. "Flight leader, I'm getting some disturbing intelligence updates from command," came the voice of Captain Anderson, their communications officer. "Multiple reports suggest the infection rate is accelerating faster than initial projections. CDC estimates suggest that affected areas are seeing complete population turnover within 72 hours of initial outbreak." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. What does complete population turnover mean exactly? "Either evacuated, dead, or infected, sir. No significant pockets of normal civilian activity remain in any of the primary outbreak zones." As they crossed into Virginia airspace, the radio chatter from ground units became increasingly desperate. Marcus listened to fragmented reports from National Guard units describing tactical situations that defied conventional military doctrine. Infected individuals who seemed to anticipate military movements, who used abandoned vehicles and urban infrastructure to create obstacles and channeling points, who attacked in coordinated waves that suggested strategic planning. "This is Bravo Company, requesting immediate air support at grid reference 4-4-7-2, came a strained voice through the emergency frequency. "We have approximately 200 hostiles converging on our position from multiple directions. These are not random mob attacks, they're using flanking maneuvers." Lieutenant Torres's voice crackled through the squadron comm system. "Marcus, are you hearing this? How is this possible if they've lost higher brain functions?" Before Marcus could respond, their tactical display lit up with priority targeting information. The Marine units they were supposed to support at Union Station had encountered heavy resistance and were requesting immediate close air support. According to the intelligence update, the civilian evacuation had been compromised when infected individuals had somehow infiltrated the tunnel system from multiple access points simultaneously. "All flights, this is command. Mission parameters are changing. Primary objective is now combat search and rescue for trapped Marine units. Secondary objective is containment of infected populations to prevent further spread toward secure zones." Marcus's training kicked in as he adjusted his flight path toward the new target area. Below, the outskirts of Washington, D.C. looked like a war zone. Entire neighborhoods were burning, and the Potomac River was clogged with boats and debris from people who had tried to escape by water. "Flight leader, I'm picking up a transmission from the Marine unit we're supposed to support," reported Captain Chen. "They're saying something about the infected using the tunnel system more effectively than they expected. The hostiles seem to know the underground layout better than the Marines do." "How is that possible?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that nothing about this situation was going to follow normal patterns. "Unknown, sir. But the Marine commander is requesting permission to use explosive charges to collapse certain tunnel sections. He says it's the only way to prevent the infected from continuing to outflank their defensive positions." The implications were staggering. Collapsing sections of the DC metro system would not only trap any remaining civilians in the tunnels but would also cause massive infrastructure damage that could take years to repair. But if the alternative was losing an entire Marine unit and allowing the infected to break out of the current containment area. "Flight 2, this is Flight Leader. Begin reconnaissance sweep of the target area. I want visual confirmation of the situation on the ground before we commit to any kinetic operations." As Marcus brought his F-16 into a lower altitude sweep over downtown Washington, the scope of the catastrophe became clear. The streets were filled with shambling figures moving in distinct patterns that looked almost like military formations. Groups of infected individuals were positioned at key intersections and choke points, while others moved in coordinated sweeps through areas that had been cleared by military units just hours before. "Command, this is Flight Leader. Visual confirms that hostile forces are exhibiting tactical coordination consistent with organized military operations. Requesting updated rules of engagement." The response took longer than usual, and when it came, Marcus could hear the strain in the command controller's voice. "Flight leader, be advised that current situation exceeds all contingency planning parameters. You are authorized to use all necessary force to prevent infected populations from breaching the established containment perimeter. Civilian casualties are no longer the primary consideration." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. In 15 years of military service, he had never received authorization to disregard civilian casualties on American soil. The fact that command was giving him that authority meant that the situation was far worse than even the classified briefings had indicated. "Torres, Chen, Anderson, form up for coordinated strike pattern. We're going to provide the Marines with an escape corridor, then establish a fire break between the infected populations and the secure zones." "Roger that, Flight Leader," came Rebecca's steady voice, though Marcus could hear the tension beneath her professional composure. As the squadron prepared to engage, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood freeze. In the distance, he could see what appeared to be infected individuals climbing onto rooftops and tall buildings throughout the city. They seemed to be positioning themselves to observe the incoming aircraft, and their movements suggested a level of strategic thinking that contradicted everything they had been told about the nature of the infection. The first engagement came sooner than Marcus had expected. As his squadron approached the Marine positions near Union Station, his radar detected movement that shouldn't have been possible. Infected individuals were climbing onto buildings and positioning themselves in ways that provided clear sight lines to incoming aircraft. "Flight leader, I'm seeing some kind of coordinated positioning by hostiles on multiple rooftops," reported Captain Chen. "They appear to be watching us." Marcus's skin crawled as he realized the implications. "Are they tracking our approach pattern?" "It sure looks like it, sir. And there's something else, I'm picking up some kind of low-frequency transmission coming from the infected populations. It's not random noise. There's a pattern to it." Before Marcus could process this information fully, the radio erupted with desperate calls from the trapped Marine unit. "Any air support, this is Colonel Martinez with the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit. We are taking heavy casualties and need immediate extraction. The hostiles have cut off all our planned egress routes." Marcus could hear gunfire and shouting in the background of the transmission. "Colonel Martinez, this is Captain Wellington with the 14th Fighter Squadron. We're 2 minutes out from your position. Can you mark your location with smoke? Negative on smoke, Captain. The hostiles seem to be attracted to any kind of signal or light source. We're trying to stay dark and quiet, but they keep finding us anyway. Lieutenant Torres's voice cut through the comm system. Marcus, I'm seeing movement patterns down there that don't make sense. The infected aren't just wandering around randomly, they're moving in formation, with scouts out front and what looks like reserves being held back for tactical deployment. Marcus brought his aircraft lower for a visual confirmation, and what he saw defied everything they had been told about the infected. Groups of them were indeed moving in military-style formations, with advanced scouts, main body elements, and rear guards. Some were carrying improvised weapons, pieces of metal, tools, even what appeared to be organized supplies. Command, this is Flight Leader. I need to report that the infected populations are exhibiting organized military tactics. This is not mindless mob behavior. Repeat, the hostiles are using coordinated tactical movements. The response from command was immediate and alarmed. Flight Leader, confirm your assessment. Are you saying the infected retain strategic thinking capabilities? Confirmed, Command. They're using building layouts for cover and concealment, coordinating multi-directional attacks, and appear to be communicating through some kind of signal system. As Marcus spoke, he watched in horror as a group of infected individuals began systematically searching buildings near the Marine position, moving from room to room in a pattern that suggested they were conducting organized sweeps rather than random searches. Flight Leader, this is Torres. I think I know why they're so effective in urban environments. They're not limited by normal human constraints. They don't get tired, they don't need to eat or sleep, and they don't care about individual casualties. They can maintain operational tempo indefinitely. The tactical implications were staggering. Traditional military doctrine assumed that enemy forces would eventually need to rest, resupply, and reorganize. An enemy that could maintain constant pressure without any logistical needs was something no military had ever been designed to fight. Colonel Martinez, we're going to create a distraction on the north side of your position. When you see our strike, move your people south toward the river. We'll provide cover for your movement. Roger that, Captain. We'll be ready. Marcus lined up his aircraft for a precision strike on a cluster of infected individuals that seemed to be coordinating the search for the trapped Marines. As he prepared to engage, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Some of the infected were looking up at his aircraft and pointing, as if directing others' attention to the incoming threat. The strike was successful in drawing attention away from the Marine position, but the infected response was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen in combat. Instead of scattering or taking cover like normal human beings would, they immediately began moving toward the strike location in organized groups, as if they were conducting a coordinated response to the air attack. Flight Leader, the hostiles are converging on your strike location, but they're doing it in tactical formation. They're using cover and concealment, and they seem to be setting up positions to engage any follow-up strikes. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The infected were learning from the engagement, adapting their tactics in real time based on his squadron's attack patterns. This wasn't just organized behavior, it was tactical evolution happening at an unprecedented pace. Colonel Martinez, what's your status? We're moving, Captain, but slowly. We have wounded that we can't leave behind, and the hostiles seem to know exactly where we're going. They're setting up blocking positions ahead of our movement. Marcus realized that the infected weren't just coordinating their current attacks, they were anticipating and countering the Marines' tactical movements. The level of strategic thinking they were demonstrating suggested that the infection hadn't destroyed their cognitive abilities but had somehow enhanced their capacity for collective tactical planning. Command, this is Flight Leader. I'm recommending immediate escalation of threat assessment. The infected populations are not just organized, they're tactically adaptive. They're learning from our engagement patterns and modifying their behavior accordingly. The silence from command stretched longer than usual before the response came. Flight Leader, understood. Continue mission as planned. Higher command is reassessing the situation. the extraction of Colonel Martinez's Marine unit turned into a running battle that lasted 3 hours and cost Marcus's squadron more ammunition than any single engagement in his career. The infected didn't just fight, they adapted, learned, and evolved their tactics with each exchange. By the time the Marines reached the emergency landing zone, the infected had begun using abandoned vehicles as mobile cover and coordinating attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Flight Leader, this is Command. We're receiving similar reports from units across all affected areas. The infected populations appear to be sharing tactical information across vast distances through unknown means. Marcus was refueling at a forward operating base in West Virginia when the full scope of the situation became clear. Intelligence reports were coming in from multiple theaters, and the picture they painted was terrifying. The infected weren't just coordinating locally, they seemed to be part of a larger network that spanned entire regions. Captain Wellington, report to the intelligence tent immediately, came the order over the base's PA system. The intelligence tent was a hub of frantic activity. Maps covered every available surface, marked with rapidly changing symbols representing friendly forces, infected populations, and contested areas. Major Patricia Sullivan, the base intelligence officer, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Captain, what I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels, she began, pulling up a series of satellite images on the main display. These photos were taken over the past 24 hours, covering infected areas from Boston to Atlanta. The images showed something that defied explanation. Infected populations in cities hundreds of miles apart were moving in coordinated patterns, as if responding to some central command structure. Groups in Baltimore were positioning themselves in ways that complemented tactical movements in Philadelphia. Infected individuals in Richmond were creating defensive formations that supported operations in Washington, D.C. How is this possible? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. We don't know, but we have theories. The CDC is reporting that brain scans of captured infected individuals show unusual neural activity in areas associated with collective consciousness and hive mind behavior found in certain insect species. They may be operating as a single, distributed intelligence rather than as individual entities. Marcus felt his world shift. If the infected were operating as a collective intelligence, then traditional military tactics weren't just ineffective, they were potentially counterproductive. Every engagement was providing the collective with more information about military capabilities and tactics. Major, what does this mean for ongoing operations? It means we're not fighting a conventional enemy, Captain. We're fighting something that thinks faster than we do, learns from every encounter, and has access to thousands of individual units that can coordinate instantly across vast distances. The implications were staggering. Marcus thought about every engagement his squadron had participated in, every tactical decision they had made, every weapon system they had employed. All of that information was now part of the collective's understanding of military capabilities. There's something else, Major Sullivan continued, pulling up a different set of data. Communication intercepts suggest that the infected are beginning to modify their environment. They're moving debris to create obstacles, redirecting infrastructure to serve their needs, and even appearing to cultivate certain areas for unknown purposes. The satellite images showed infected populations clearing certain areas while building up others, creating what looked almost like organized settlements or staging areas. In some locations, they appeared to be constructing primitive but effective defensive positions using materials scavenged from abandoned buildings and vehicles. They're not just surviving, Marcus realized. They're building something. That's our assessment as well. And Captain, there's one more thing you need to know. We've lost contact with several overseas military installations. Initial reports suggest that similar outbreaks have begun appearing in Europe and Asia. Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. If this was a global phenomenon, then the United States military's response efforts were just one small part of a worldwide catastrophe. The infected collective wasn't just learning from American military tactics, it was potentially learning from military responses across multiple continents. What are our current operational objectives? That's being reassessed at the highest levels. Some elements in the Pentagon are pushing for large-scale strategic strikes on major infected population centers. Others are arguing for a complete withdrawal to defensible positions while we try to understand what we're dealing with. Marcus thought about the Marines he had helped extract earlier that day. Men and women who had signed up to defend their country against foreign enemies, now forced to fight something that defied every assumption about warfare and human nature. Major, in your professional assessment, can we win this fight using conventional military tactics? Major Sullivan was quiet for a long moment before responding. Captain, I've been in military intelligence for 20 years. I've analyzed threats from state actors, terrorist organizations, and asymmetric warfare scenarios. But this is something entirely different. We're not fighting an enemy that wants territory or resources or political objectives. We're fighting something that seems to want to replace us entirely. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding across the base. The PA system crackled to life with an urgent announcement, all personnel to emergency stations. We have confirmed infected populations approaching the base perimeter. This is not a drill. Marcus ran toward his aircraft, but as he reached the flight line, he could see something that made his blood freeze. In the distance, moving across the West Virginia hills, were organized columns of infected individuals. They weren't shambling randomly, they were marching in formation, directly toward the base, as if they knew exactly where the military forces were positioned. The attack on the West Virginia Forward Operating Base began at precisely 0347 hours, and from the first moments, it was clear that the infected had studied every aspect of the base's defensive layout. They struck simultaneously at 3 separate points along the perimeter, each attack perfectly timed to overwhelm defensive positions while preventing mutual support between sections. Marcus was in his aircraft when the first explosions lit up the night sky. The infected had somehow acquired and deployed explosive devices against the base's power generation facility, communications array, and primary ammunition storage bunker. The coordination required for such precise timing suggested a level of strategic planning that exceeded many conventional military operations. All aircraft, immediate takeoff authorized, came the emergency order through his headset. Base is under coordinated assault. Provide close air support for ground defense. As Marcus's F-16 lifted off from the runway, he could see the scope of the attack through his night vision systems. The infected weren't just attacking randomly, they had created multiple diversionary assaults while concentrating their main effort against the base's most critical vulnerabilities. Flight Leader, this is ground control. The hostiles have breached the eastern perimeter and are advancing in organized formations toward the command bunker. They appear to be using captured military equipment. Marcus brought his aircraft around for a gun run on the advancing infected forces, but what he saw through his targeting system made him pause. The infected were moving in textbook infantry formations, using proper cover and concealment techniques, and employing suppressive fire tactics with weapons they had obviously acquired from overrun military positions. Command, these hostiles are using advanced military tactics. They're not acting like mindless infected, they're fighting like trained soldiers. Roger that, Flight Leader. Intelligence suggests that the collective retains and utilizes the knowledge and skills of every individual it assimilates. Former military personnel within the infected population are providing tactical expertise to the entire collective. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Every soldier, every Marine, every Air Force pilot who had been infected wasn't just lost to the enemy, they were actively contributing their training and experience to the collective's growing military capabilities. Lieutenant Torres's voice crackled through the comm system. Marcus, I'm seeing something impossible. The infected forces are communicating through hand signals and tactical formations, but they're also coordinating with infected populations that are miles away. My radar is picking up coordinated movements by hostile forces across a 50-mile radius. Marcus realized that the attack on their base wasn't an isolated tactical operation, it was part of a larger strategic offensive involving infected populations across the entire region. While they were focused on defending one location, the collective was simultaneously executing coordinated attacks across multiple sites. Ground control, what's the status of other installations in the region? Unknown, Flight Leader. We've lost communication with Quantico, Norfolk, and Dover. Last reports indicated they were all under simultaneous assault. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The collective wasn't just learning to fight, it was learning to wage strategic warfare on a scale that required coordination between multiple operational theaters. The infected were conducting a multi-front campaign that would have challenged even the most experienced military commanders. Flight 2, concentrate fire on the Eastern Assault Force. Flight 3, provide cover for base personnel evacuation. As Marcus lined up for his attack run, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. Some of the infected forces were setting up what appeared to be anti-aircraft positions, using equipment that suggested they understood the threat posed by close air support operations. Flight Leader, I'm picking up radar lock warnings. The hostiles have deployed surface-to-air missile systems. Marcus jerked his aircraft into evasive maneuvers as a shoulder-fired missile streaked past his canopy. The infected had not only acquired advanced weapons systems but were employing them with tactical precision that suggested professional military training. Command, the hostiles have demonstrated surface-to-air capabilities. Recommend immediate revision of air support protocols. The base's defensive perimeter was collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated. Despite having every advantage in terms of equipment, fortification, and firepower, the defenders were being systematically overwhelmed by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every tactical decision. Flight Leader, this is Colonel Hayes, came his commanding officer's voice through the radio. I'm ordering immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. The base is no longer defensible. Marcus watched through his night vision as base personnel loaded into transport vehicles and aircraft, abandoning positions that had been considered secure just hours earlier. The infected forces weren't pursuing the evacuating personnel, they were methodically securing the base's facilities and equipment, as if they intended to use them for their own purposes. Colonel, what's our fallback position? There isn't one, Captain. Every forward operating base in the region is either under attack or has already fallen. We're conducting a general withdrawal to positions west of the Mississippi River. The scope of the military collapse was staggering. In less than 72 hours, the infected collective had gone from scattered outbreaks to coordinated operations that were overwhelming the most powerful military force in human history. As Marcus's squadron provided cover for the evacuation, he realized that they weren't just retreating from a tactical defeat, they were witnessing the systematic dismantling of conventional military doctrine by an enemy that had evolved beyond traditional warfare paradigms. The infected collective wasn't just winning individual battles, it was demonstrating that human military organizations, with all their technology and training, were fundamentally inadequate to defend against an enemy that could learn, adapt, and coordinate at a pace that exceeded human capabilities. The retreat to positions west of the Mississippi River turned into a fighting withdrawal that lasted 6 days and cost the military nearly 40% of its operational aircraft. Marcus's squadron, now reduced to 7 functional F-16s, found themselves providing constant rearguard actions as ground forces attempted to establish defensive lines that the infected collective seemed to penetrate almost as quickly as they could be established. Flight Leader, this is General Morrison at Strategic Command, came the transmission that Marcus had been dreading. I'm ordering all remaining air assets to consolidate at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. We're implementing Operation Final Stand. Marcus had heard rumors about Final Stand, a contingency plan that involved using strategic nuclear weapons against major population centers to prevent complete societal collapse. The fact that it was being activated meant that conventional military operations had been deemed ineffective. General, what's the current assessment of infected populations east of our fallback positions? Captain, based on our best intelligence, the infected collective now controls approximately 60% of the continental United States. More critically, they appear to be consolidating their control and establishing some kind of organized infrastructure in captured territories. The intelligence reports that Marcus received during the flight to Offutt painted a picture that challenged every assumption about the nature of the outbreak. Satellite imagery showed infected populations not just occupying abandoned cities, but actively rebuilding and modifying infrastructure for unknown purposes. "They're not just surviving," reported Major Sullivan during the emergency briefing at Offutt. "They're constructing something. Power grids are being restored in infected areas, transportation networks are being modified, and we're seeing large-scale construction projects that suggest long-term strategic planning." Marcus studied the satellite photos showing infected populations working in coordinated groups to repair bridges, clear roads, and establish what appeared to be communication networks spanning hundreds of miles. "Major, what do you think they're building?" "Our best assessment is that they're creating a parallel civilization, Captain. One designed to support their collective consciousness rather than individual human needs. The infrastructure modifications they're making suggest they're planning for permanent occupation and expansion." The briefing was interrupted by an urgent communication from overseas commands. Similar collective organizations were now controlling major portions of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The infected phenomenon had become a global transformation that was replacing human civilization with something entirely different. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison addressed the assembled personnel, "I'm not going to sugarcoat our situation. Conventional military operations have failed. The enemy's ability to learn and adapt exceeds our capacity to develop effective countermeasures. We are now operating under the assumption that this represents an extinction-level threat to human civilization." Marcus felt the weight of that assessment settle over the room. They weren't fighting to win territory or achieve political objectives, they were fighting for the continued existence of humanity as a species. "Our mission parameters are changing," the general continued. "Operation Final Stand will involve coordinated strategic strikes on major infected population centers, followed by establishment of permanent defensive perimeters around remaining human territories. This is no longer a conventional military operation, it's a survival strategy." Lieutenant Torres raised her hand. "General, what about civilian populations in infected territories? Intelligence suggests there may still be human survivors in isolated pockets." "Lieutenant, that's a tragic reality we're going to have to accept. Our priority must be preserving viable human populations in defensible territories. We cannot risk the survival of our species attempting to rescue individuals in areas already under collective control." Marcus thought about his sister Emma in Philadelphia, his parents in their retirement community, and the millions of other Americans who were either dead, infected, or hiding in territories now controlled by the collective. The military was essentially writing off half the country and everyone in it. "Captain Wellington," the general called out, "your squadron will be tasked with reconnaissance and target assessment for the strategic strikes. I need accurate intelligence on population density and infrastructure significance in major infected centers." The mission Marcus was being assigned would involve flying over cities that had once been home to millions of Americans, now transformed into something alien and hostile. He would be providing targeting data for weapons that would obliterate not just the infected, but any remaining human survivors and the accumulated cultural heritage of centuries. "General, permission to speak freely?" "Granted, Captain." "Are we certain that strategic nuclear strikes will be effective against the collective? If they've demonstrated the ability to learn and adapt to conventional weapons, what makes us think they can't adapt to strategic weapons as well?" The silence that followed Marcus's question was longer than comfortable. Finally, the general responded, "Captain, we don't know. But it's the only option we have left that might break their coordination and prevent complete global transformation." As the briefing concluded and personnel dispersed to their assignments, Marcus realized that they were essentially gambling the future of human civilization on a strategy that might not work against an enemy they still didn't understand. The infected collective. The reconnaissance flights over former American cities revealed a transformation that exceeded Marcus's worst fears. Philadelphia, where his sister had worked, was no longer recognizable as a human settlement. The infected collective had systematically modified the urban landscape, creating structures that served purposes no human could understand. "Flight leader, I'm seeing construction patterns that don't match any known architectural principles," reported Lieutenant Torres as they flew over what had once been downtown Baltimore. The infected appear to be building vertical networks that connect buildings at multiple levels, creating three-dimensional movement corridors throughout the city. Marcus studied the modified cityscape through his aircraft's advanced imaging systems. The collective hadn't just occupied human infrastructure, they had evolved it into something entirely different. Bridges connected buildings that had never been linked, underground networks had been expanded into vast subterranean complexes, and the entire urban environment had been restructured to facilitate rapid movement and coordination of large populations. Command, the infected territories show evidence of advanced engineering projects that suggest capabilities beyond simple tool use. They appear to be implementing complex urban planning on a massive scale. The response from Strategic Command carried a tone of resignation that Marcus had never heard in official communications. Flight Leader, understood. Continue reconnaissance and prepare target assessment for strategic strike authorization. As they flew over Washington, D.C., Marcus could see that the collective had transformed the seat of American government into something that resembled a vast organic network. The familiar landmarks were still visible, but they had been connected and modified in ways that created a unified structure spanning the entire metropolitan area. Torres, are you seeing this? They've turned the entire capital region into a single integrated facility. Confirmed, Marcus. And look at the movement patterns, there are infected populations moving through those connection networks in organized streams. It's like watching the circulation system of some enormous organism. The strategic implications were staggering. The collective hadn't just conquered human territories, they had transformed them into components of a larger system that spanned multiple cities and potentially entire regions. The nuclear strikes being planned would target individual urban areas, but if the collective had created an integrated network spanning hundreds of miles, destroying individual nodes might not significantly impact their overall capabilities. Command, request permission to extend reconnaissance to assess potential network connections between major population centers. Negative, Flight Leader. Maintain current mission parameters and prepare for immediate return to base. Strategic strike authorization has been approved for implementation within 6 hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 6 hours meant that the decision had already been made at the highest levels of government. American cities were going to be destroyed by American weapons in a desperate attempt to prevent the complete transformation of human civilization. Flight 2, form up for return flight. Mission complete. As Marcus's squadron flew back toward Nebraska, he couldn't shake the image of the transformed cities below. The collective had achieved in weeks what human urban planners spent decades trying to accomplish, the creation of truly integrated metropolitan systems that functioned as unified entities rather than collections of competing interests. The landing at Offutt Air Force Base brought Marcus back to a world that felt increasingly fragile and temporary. Ground crews were working frantically to prepare aircraft for what everyone understood would be either humanity's last desperate gamble or the beginning of their final defeat. Captain Wellington, report to the command bunker immediately, came the order as Marcus completed his post-flight procedures. The command bunker was a scene of controlled chaos. Banks of communication equipment connected military leaders to government officials, international allies, and scattered resistance groups throughout the infected territories. Large display screens showed real-time satellite imagery of the collective's continued expansion and the positioning of strategic weapons systems. Captain, your reconnaissance data confirms our worst fears, General Morrison announced as Marcus entered the briefing area. The infected collective has created an integrated network that spans the entire eastern seaboard. Traditional targeting strategies may be insufficient to disrupt their coordination. Marcus studied the tactical display showing the planned strike locations. Major cities from Boston to Atlanta were marked for nuclear destruction, but the network connections identified during his reconnaissance mission suggested that the collective might be able to maintain coordination even after losing individual population centers. General, what's the status of international operations? Similar situations worldwide, Captain. European forces have already implemented strategic strikes against infected populations in major metropolitan areas. Results have been mixed. The collective appears capable of maintaining operational effectiveness even after significant population losses. The implications were clear: nuclear weapons might kill millions of infected individuals, but they might not significantly degrade the collective's overall capabilities. Humanity was preparing to destroy its own cities in an attack that might prove to be tactically ineffective against an enemy that had evolved beyond conventional strategic thinking. Captain, I'm assigning your squadron to post-strike reconnaissance. If these strategic operations are successful, we'll need immediate assessment of collective response patterns. If they're unsuccessful... The general paused, clearly struggling with the implications. If they're unsuccessful, your squadron will be tasked with providing escort for government evacuation to secure facilities. Marcus realized that the military leadership was preparing for the possibility that even nuclear weapons might fail against the collective. Contingency plans were being made for the complete evacuation of remaining government officials to underground facilities where they could continue coordinating resistance operations even after the loss of most American territory. As Marcus prepared for what might be his final mission, he thought about the transformation he had witnessed during his reconnaissance flights. The collective hadn't just conquered human civilization, they had begun the process of replacing it with something entirely different. Whether humanity's desperate final gamble would succeed or simply accelerate their own destruction remained to be seen. The countdown to nuclear strikes had begun, and Marcus Wellington, career Air Force pilot, found himself preparing to witness either the salvation or the final chapter of human civilization in North America. The infected collective had forced humanity to choose between destroying their own cities or accepting complete transformation into something no longer recognizably human. In 6 hours, the world would discover whether conventional weapons of mass destruction could defeat an enemy that had evolved beyond the limitations of individual consciousness, or whether humanity's last desperate act would prove as ineffective as every other strategy they had attempted against the collective's inexorable advance.